Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're jumping into something pretty significant.
Yeah, really significant. It could change how the U.S. government actually, well, buys things.
Exactly. We're talking about a massive overhaul of the Federal Acquisition Regulation, the FAR.
And we've got some fresh material to work with here. It's a blog post straight from the GSA, the General Services Administration.
Right. It's titled Part 1, Setting the Stage, Understanding the Vision Behind the FAR Overhaul. Gives us a first look.
And it's penned by GSA Acting Administrator Stephen Ahikian and FAS Commissioner Josh Grunbaum. Just came out June 3rd, 2025.
So our mission for this deep dive is really to get under the hood of that vision. Why now? Why this big change?
And maybe most importantly, what does it actually mean for you, the listener, if you're part of the federal workforce dealing with acquisition?
Because, they're not just tweaking things around the edges here.
No, definitely not.
The Post makes it clear this whole effort is driven by Executive Order 14275.
Ah, yes, the Restoring Common Sense to Federal Procurement Order.
That's the one. And they're calling this the most significant update to the FAR in, over 40 years?
Over 4 decades, yeah, since the 1980s. That tells you something right there.
It really does. It signals that maybe the current system has gotten a bit unwieldy.
That seems to be the core message, that it's just become too difficult to navigate after all this time.
Okay, so let's unpack it. Where do they start? How do they frame the problem they're trying to fix?
Well, they use a pretty good analogy, actually. Think of the FAR like a big apartment building.
Okay.
Started out simple, probably functional, but over the years, people kept adding wings, changing staircases, adding hallways here and there.
Sort of bolting things on as needs popped up without maybe thinking about the whole picture.
Exactly. Each individual change probably made sense in isolation, for a specific reason at that time. But add all those up over 40 years, and what you get is what they call a confusing maze.
Yeah, I can picture that. A building where even the people who've lived there forever know it's kind of weird and hard to get around, and new people are totally lost without a map.
That's precisely the feeling they convey about the FAR right now. It's just become too complex.
So the vision for the overhaul, is it like tearing the building down?
No, not tearing it down. It's more like a major renovation. The idea is to find the building's original essential blueprint again.
Okay.
Keep the core structure, the parts required by law, the foundation, the main supports, but clear out all that extra stuff, the ad hoc additions that created the maze.
So strip away the complexity and get back to basics, but design for how things work today.
That's the goal. Create spaces that work for how people actually operate now.
Right.
And instead of having rules like taped to every wall,
Yeah.
people get a practical guide, easy to use, but separate from the main structure.
That's a really helpful way to think about regulatory change. So back to the FAR itself, they're saying the actual regulation is being rewritten, pared back.
Comprehensively overhauled is the term they use, pared back to its statutory roots, rewritten in plain language.
Plain language is always good.
Always. And here's where it gets really interesting for the workforce. All those specific one-off procedural rules that got tacked onto the regulation over time,
Yeah.
a lot of those are apparently going to move out of the FAR itself.
Out. Where are they going?
Into more flexible things like practical guides or handbooks, things that can be updated more easily, presumably.
Wow. Okay, moving the detailed step-by-step instructions out of the core regulation, that feels like a big deal.
It is. It could fundamentally change how people interact with the rules day to day.
So the aim is a clearer FAR, easier to navigate, supporting smart decisions, grounded in law, but not bogged down by decades of accumulated procedural baggage.
That's the vision. And they frame this as a real opportunity.
An opportunity for what, exactly?
Well, they're very clear. It's not about ditching rules or becoming reckless. It's about finding a better balance.
The classic balance between what?
Between compliance, following the law, doing what's required, and effectiveness, actually getting things done efficiently, smartly, delivering value for the taxpayer.
That makes sense. That tension is always there in government work.
Yeah.
But okay, if the detailed steps move into these guides, what does that mean practically for the contracting officer, the program manager? How do they work in this new world?
Yeah, that's the crucial part. And the source dives into this. It means some shifts are needed from the acquisition workforce.
Okay, like what adjustments do people need to make?
Well, first, they really emphasize trusting training and expertise. Meaning, most people doing this work have good judgment built up over years. That core knowledge is still vital, maybe even more vital when the rules aren't spelling out every single step.
Right, your experience doesn't just disappear, But what about newer folks? How do they learn if the detailed map isn't in the main rulebook anymore?
That's a fair question. The source implies the guides will help, but it also leads to their second point. Focus on principles, not just procedures.
Principles over procedures. So understand the why behind the rules, not just the how of following a checklist.
Exactly. Internalize the core goals.
Hmm.
Fairness, efficiency, effectiveness, transparency. Think about the objective, not just the mandated process steps.
That definitely requires a different way of thinking. Less mechanical, maybe?
Absolutely. And third, they highlight collaboration. It becomes even more critical.
Why more critical?
Because if the path isn't explicitly laid out for every single scenario, you'll need to talk to your colleagues, share what you're seeing, lean on team knowledge, maybe check with legal or policy experts more proactively.
So less relying on finding the answer alone in the book, and more on collective wisdom and discussion.
Precisely. Building that shared understanding within teams, across agencies even.
Okay, that makes sense. Trust expertise, focus on principles, collaborate more. What else?
And the last point is pretty realistic, I think. They acknowledge mistakes will happen.
Yeah, with any big change that seems inevitable.
Right. And they say what really matters isn't avoiding mistakes entirely, which is impossible, but how we learn from them, how we adapt.
That points towards needing a culture that supports learning from errors, rather than just punishing them, right? Which can be tricky in government.
Very tricky, but necessary for this kind of shift. And they don't shy away from the difficulty. There's a whole section called the inevitable adjustment period.
Okay, so they're upfront about it not being easy.
Very upfront. They basically say, look, let's be honest, this will feel uncomfortable for a while as people adapt.
That discomfort, it's normal though, isn't it? When you learn anything new, there's that awkward phase.
Exactly how they frame it. They say that discomfort is actually a necessary part of growth.
Okay.
They use the analogy of learning to ride a bike. Remember how wobbly and uncertain that felt?
Oh, yeah. Definitely fell a few times.
Right. Maybe frustrating. But you couldn't get to riding confidently without going through that awkward, unstable phase. It was essential.
That's a really good analogy, actually. It connects. So this FIR overhaul isn't just about changing a document. It's about changing how people work with the rules, how they approach their jobs.
It really is. It demands a shift towards trusting professional judgment, focusing on the underlying principles, working together, and being willing to learn, even from missteps.
The scale of the cultural change they're aiming for here seems pretty huge, moving from something super prescriptive to something more streamlined and principle-based.
It's a significant shift in the operating paradigm, no doubt about it, relying much more on the people doing the work.
And they're clearly saying this is just the start of the discussion, right?
Yeah, this blog post is explicitly called Part 1. So we can expect more details on the specifics, the rollout, the guides, all of that, hopefully soon.
Okay, so let's recap the main takeaways from this first look. The current FAR, seen as a confusing maze.
Right. Built up over 40 years.
The vision, a major renovation. Simplify, clarify, get back to statutory basics, use plain language.
And crucially, move a lot of the detailed procedural stuff out of the FAR itself and into practical, flexible guides.
Which aims for a better balance between compliance and actually getting things done effectively.
Exactly. But this requires adjustment from the workforce.
Big adjustments. Trusting expertise, focusing on the core principles behind the rules.
Collaborating more, and creating a culture where it's okay to learn from mistakes during this transition.
And acknowledging that adjustment period will likely feel uncomfortable, but framing that discomfort, like learning to ride a bike, necessary for growth.
It sets the stage for a fundamental change in how federal acquisition operates.
Absolutely. It gives us a clear sense of the why and the what at a high level, and really underscores the human element here.
Indeed. A lot to watch as this unfolds.
So for you, listening in, here's something to think about, drawing right from what we've discussed. If those detailed, step-by-step instructions are moving out of the main regulation and into guides, what does it really take, day to day, for you to rely on your training, trust your own judgment, and focus on those core principles? Especially when the path isn't perfectly mapped out anymore.
That's the key question, isn't it? Something to mull over as these FIR changes start rolling out.
Definitely something to consider. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the vision behind the FIR overhaul.
Glad to be here and dig into it with you.